welcome back to Let's Talk About Tobacco. I'm Lee Keller, and I'm here with Janiece Davis, Dr. Barry Hummel, and Dr. Michael Feinstein. And we were just talking about the movies. Why do they have to have tobacco in the movies? What's the impact?
Well, it ends up being sort of a subtle marketing tool that it's in there. I mean, there were days when they outright bought to have their name in there, what we call product placement, but it's much more subtle now. It's more about how many characters can you have smoke. And so what happens is there's some studies out there being done out of UC San Francisco that show that between 50 and 60% of students who admit to smoking say they made that decision because it looked cool in a movie. So it has a tremendous impact. You know, you would think things like peer pressure and those kinds of things, social norming, they all have an impact. This is part of the social norming. This is why they think that so many adults smoke. But it starts when we're really, really young. So for example, if I asked you, Lee, which of the following characters in a Disney movie did not smoke? And we'll say Pinocchio, Peter Pan, Alice from Alice in Wonderland, Ariel from The Little Mermaid, the genie from Aladdin, and Roger from 101 Dalmatians. Which of those characters did not smoke in a Disney movie?
I'd probably lean towards Ariel because underwater.
Right, you would think so, but that's not true. In fact, it's a trick question because all those characters smoked in a movie. Ariel actually smokes in the castle when she's got her legs and she's up, she's not speaking, and she picks up a pipe at the dinner table. And there's scenes of each of those characters smoking in those movies. Those movies go back to the 1940s, I understand that. And they always say, oh, they're older movies, but they're not because The Little Mermaid and Aladdin were made in the 80s and 90s. They always say it's the bad guys like Cruella de Vil, but it's not because everybody I just listed was a protagonist or the good guy in the movie. These things have a big impact on our kids. I put Pinocchio in many times for my daughter when she was 4 and then left the room to go actually get some work done. 7 characters smoking Pinocchio, including Pinocchio, who I want to point out is a wooden boy.
You
right?
pointed it out before. That is amazing.
So it's just a silly thing that he would try to light himself on fire. So these things have an amazing impact on the number and volume of times that kids are exposed to tobacco, which goes towards that normalization. And it's not just smoking tobacco. There's plenty of examples of spit tobacco being used. One of my favorites is A League of Their Own, which is a baseball movie. And now with Major League Baseball just trying to maybe get it out finally out of Major League Baseball, every time you watch that movie, you watch Tom Hanks, he has tobacco in his mouth in virtually every scene he's in. So these things have a big, big impact. And spit tobacco is incredibly important.
Yeah, it's got a lot of impact on diseases, especially the cancer impact.
Absolutely. A lot of the spit tobacco, which now is in like tea bags, but some of the spit tobacco, the dip, the snuff, the chew, it's mostly a male type of habit, more so than female, but I think baseball has had a great impact on boys, especially when they play sports at a young age. When they put that tobacco in their mouth, a lot of times if it's dip, they'll put it between their cheek and gum, and many times they'll put it in the same place time after time after time. And that the local carcinogens, the effect of the carcinogens locally in the place they put it, usually starts off as a white lesion in the mouth.
Very small?
If the first sign of a problem, and that's called leukoplakia, and it's sort of a thick whitish lesion that forms right where they usually put that chewing tobacco. Also, a lot of the carcinogens and the poisons, of which there are many in chewing tobacco, maybe don't affect the lungs directly, but they certainly affect every organ and every cell in our body because they're being absorbed through the mucous membranes in the mouth and throat. So the chance of cancer is not only in the mouth but in other parts of the body also exist as well.
Wow. And oral cancer is like one of the worst, isn't it?
Very, very severe. In many cases, parts of the tongue, parts of the jawbone have to be removed, and in some cases, when it gets into the lymph nodes, of which there are many in the throat, and metastasizes, it can be a deadly cancer.
And when we were talking earlier, we were talking about how kids perceive themselves as invincible because, as Dr. Hummel said, you get this when you're young and you start smoking, but it's going to continue and kill you many years later. That's not always the case with oral cancer and using spitless or
It can occur in a young person. It seems that the cancer, the effect of oral cancer, possibly because of the anatomy and the way it's used, it seems to occur in younger ages than the effects of smoking tobacco, which usually occurs more in the older population. the cancers themselves are just, they're awful and often undetected. Unfortunately, many people just don't go to healthcare providers, dentists, whatever. Maybe they're ashamed. It does turn their teeth black. Their breath smells pretty bad. And it seems to me that that's just an awful, awful addiction and habit for people to get into.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot more about that lately.
We have many rural areas in the state of Florida. I work up in Gilchrist and Dixie County outside Gainesville. It's almost a rite of passage to go out hunting with your dad and get your first can of dip up there. They have usage rates up there that are 5 and 6 times higher than it is for the state average, and are giving it to kids on purpose as if it's part of the culture. So we have a lot of work to do to get that misperception that it's somehow safer than smoking out of the community's knowledge base. It's not. It's equally dangerous, and maybe not as deadly, which is interesting because it's almost the effect of having cancer and having a disfiguring surgery and then living with that for years and years and years. Most of the spokespeople nationally who speak on this are former baseball players who got cancer at a very young age, and they're wonderful people, and they come to classes and make an impact because they are so horribly disfigured. But these people have to wake up with that every day, knowing that that decision left them with this life. Here locally, we have laryngectomy folks who come out and speak to our school groups. Some of them have been participating for 20 years, barely able to speak or unable to speak because of something that they decided to do. Horribly debilitating diseases.
We have a lot of links on our website to go to videos and pictures that show all the different aspects of tobacco-related illnesses, but I think the most disturbing are definitely those associated with oral cancers, which most frequently are associated with the non-smoking varieties of tobacco. So, how do kids get connected with this tobacco? I mean, here you are, you're a kid. Why would you want to go out and start using tobacco? How would you lure me?
Well, that's the interesting question, is how would you lure somebody? Because remember, good advertising sells you something that you don't want and you don't need. That's what good advertising does. You know, if you want something or you need it, you know how to find it. So all the advertising is designed to get these things into people's hands when it's out of their radar. How do we get it in our radar? And one of the great tricks with the tobacco industry and youth for most of their products is in this very bucket.
Wow.
And that is to blur the lines between tobacco and candy.
Wow. So we've got candy as the appeal for young kids, and I'm going to want to start using tobacco because of that?
Well,
that's not legal for me.
Well, no, it's a more subtle thing. Let's go back in time to when you and I were kids, Lee, which is, back at the turn of the century.
Which century?
And back then, we had things like candy cigarettes, and these are still available. You're going to find them in ice cream parlors and kind of specialty stores. But the packaging is designed to look exactly like a cigarette pack. So here's a candy cigarette and here's a box of Marlboros. And you ask yourself, why do we need this? First of all, it's not very good candy if you remember eating it. But secondly, why does it have to look exactly like the box? And the answer is because it gives kids a prop. It's a way to model adult behavior. It's that normalization thing where we say, well, if every adult's doing it, let me pretend with a candy cigarette and act like my father. Now, I did that. It didn't make me a smoker. But it conditioned me to hold it, walk around and pretend I was an older person. And so where it's gotten really dangerous is, what if I told you that we could switch that? What if I told you that now that the tobacco packages are starting to look more like candy packages is the trick?
I'll tell you what, when we come back in a minute, let's take a look at some of those examples, and we'll see and understand why kids are very much in risk with tobacco. So stay right with us.